A few years ago, we discussed an issue which is currently in the forefront of the news. Please enjoy this prior episode, and please visit our website at conversationsacrosstime.com. Thank you.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.
So President Putin is no different than President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, and President Clinton in terms of supporting immoral leaders.
Right. Well, that's the whole point. They supported it because of the balance of power that we discussed before.
I don't understand. Do you think that the Russian people should starve, that they should not have access to the foods that they need, and Ukraine being the breadbasket for Russia?
Russia mustn't think that every nation around it lives to serve its purpose.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.
Congress I don't know about the Senate, but Congress, which has to authorize it too, I think if that turns over, then they'll be able to put a stop to a lot of this, and that's what I'm hoping for.
And I must state that you talked about looking into the future. My class, the class I have represented as Sullivan and Cromwell, they don't do that. The immediate profit margin, that's what they think about.
So
that's their consideration.
You're Secretary Dulles, you're saying, in effect, that your class would be willing to risk nuclear war with Iran to maintain the money and the investments that you have? Is that what you're saying? I don't believe you're saying that.
I'm afraid, looking back in hindsight over the years, I must say it. And since I have passed away, I could look from that vantage point. Yes, indeed. My class, my ruling class that has dominated the world for so long, just doesn't have the foresight to see into the future and beyond what if, say, oil becomes irrelevant in the United States.
Well, that's...
Yeah, but things are changing. I mean, I know this particular president that we have now, more or less disregards globalization, but globalization has really made us really all one big country when you look at it, in the big picture. China's becoming a dominant economic power. It's no longer just the captains of industry in the United States that rule the world. It's not the way it is anymore.
And I think that's what he's saying. That's what he's that class, that business class that he represented, because Sullivan and Cromwell still represents international business interests. And he's saying that those folk really don't care about what happens.
Well, I think they do.
I
think they do care. They will care about what happens because of globalization. Because they're no longer only interested in the United States. They have to continue to be interested in all these other countries that play a big part in their profit. I mean, if they didn't have these other countries to sell their products to, then they wouldn't be as big a business as they are now, and profitable as business. So
that is true.
I think that's going to help in terms of the.
Well, I think that your country historically has not understand the trends of history, and
Meaning,
meaning they step on landmines all the time because they think in very, very short-term solutions and short-term advantage rather than long-term. So his class or his ilk doesn't really care about 100 years down the road or 200 years down the road. They care about next year's profit margin. And we're much more apt in Mother Russia to look at the long-range trends of history. And I think one of the mistakes that your country makes in terms of dealing with Islamic countries, Arab and non-Arab Islamic countries, is that these countries look at the long-range trends of history. They don't look at immediate solutions. Islamic fundamentalists don't look at a solution that's going to happen a week or 10 days or a year or 2 years. They look at 20, 30 years, 50, 100
they're
years
looking down the road.
down the road of a world dominated by, again, what's their main goal? To create a new caliphate. And they have long-range goals, and they don't care if it takes 100 years because.
Mr. Dostoevsky, let me just ask you, this is a hypothetical. What do you think would have happened in terms of that, because that's what these Islamic extremists are looking for, to be able to establish a caliphate. What do you think would have happened if the McMahon Agreement had been, if in fact after Versailles, after World War I, if Britain and the United States had lived up to what was promised to
Ben Ali.
Hussein Bin Ali to create the caliphate? What do you think? I mean, where would we be sitting today?
Probably in the same place because oil would dominate everything.
There we go. So
I mean, oil. You know, it's ironic, but in science, people say oil and water never mix, and in the Middle East, they're the two dominant factors, oil and water. So, in answer to your question, because of oil, I don't think there'd be any difference. There might not. It might not have be right. It might not have be the fighting might not be on religious grounds, but it would be some other grounds.
So they would be fighting to protect their caliphate, but they would come up with.
But to protect their caliphate, they would come up against the superpowers, the United States, France, Britain, who wanted their oil.
Yeah. Okay. And we're also going to put that map up to demonstrate to the audience, and I know for those that are regular viewers, you know exactly what we're talking about. But of course, during World War I, Hussein Bin Ali was a person who was both Shia and Sunni, and was requested by Great Britain and France because he was actually a subject of the Ottoman Empire. So he was requested by Great Britain and France to, in fact, create another front that Germany would have to fight. And the promise to him was that he would be given land to form a caliphate. That did not happen. And you probably know the history that Lawrence of Arabia, that movie is based upon this same exact issue. So that if Mr. Hussein Bin Ali had been given, if the United States and Great Britain and France had lived up to their promises, he would have been given the land to establish a caliphate, and there might not be as much bickering going on. But to your point, because oil was coming onto the world stage, then there would still be unrest in the Middle East because the capitalists would be interested in the oil.
Now, and also, if that had happened, and Mr. Dulles, who was at Versailles, I believe, weren't you at Versailles?
Yes, I was there to assist.
And Woodrow Wilson had not tried to diminish the Islamic people and Arab countries by saying they couldn't govern themselves, and maybe with a caliphate, and maybe it would have evolved into something where they could have made agreements that would not have necessitated military action and still had access to the resources. Right, and still had access to the resources.
But the problem is that the capitalist class that Mr. Dulles represents never wanted to pay a fair price for the resources.
Such as I have said, the They feel very entitled to take whatever they want from the world to make a profit from it. They are like that, as you say, yes.
Well, for a long, long time, they were again in this dominant position and they were able to do it, but that's not the case anymore.
That's correct.
The world stage
So-
has changed.
That's
The
correct.
world has changed, and whether it's changed for the better or the worse, we probably won't find out. But
Mr. Dulles, I
I think
have
in the long run, it's probably for the better.
But Mr. Dulles was an extreme anti-communist. I don't know if Mr. Dulles was not necessarily anti-Russian. So where would you stand today? Since we are not, since Mother Russia is not communist.
Well, such as I've said, it distresses me that Mr. Putin's regime has interfered in the affairs.
Please. Oh,
Please let me
please.
finish, Mr.
Oh,
Dawson.
please.
Please let me finish in our election. But I do have your point, Mr. Dostoevsky. As you say, karma has come to haunt the United States. And I look at that at a vantage point from heaven. And I must say, many people in the Republican Party have a great respect for Mr. Putin. I mean, he harasses homosexuals. He venerates the Orthodox Church. He's very authoritarian.
He's just like your president.
Yes, as you say nowadays.
Maybe,
These are kind.
Are you talking about my dear Mr. Putin or your Mr.
Both his puppet too.
Spanky
As-
McTweeter?
As I must say, as you say nowadays, Mr. Putin is the Republican Party's, to use a colloquialism, kind of guy. The kind of person they would.
that you respect, just like the leader in Turkey.
Yeah, he is the kind of person that I'm afraid the current Republican Party would like to have in charge, running the United States, the perfect role model for an authoritarian leader for the United
Which
States.
is antithetical to what the United States is about.
Listen, they're not happy about this guy. I mean, especially now. He's taken over the Republican Party. He's going against all of the basic ideals of what the Republicans are really supposed to be about. He's anti-free trade, which is a major component of the Republican dictum. He's done everything. He's his own party. And I think and I hope that what this is going to cause, in turn, is really some kind of revolution back to what democracy is supposed to be about. And I think that the usurping of power by a person like Trump, under these circumstances, will cause changes to be made that are going to enhance the democratic processes in this country. Like getting away from gerrymandering, which I think is in the infant stages of it now, and I think that'll eventually help to make one person, one vote realistic. I think that's very important. And a blowback on lobbying, controlling the lobbying so that money doesn't play the part that it plays in the process of our government.
Yes,
And
well,
I
Reggie-
think
that's
those,
possible?
I think it is possible, and I think that it'll only be possible by exposing it as it's being exposed now. I mean, because I think the lobbying effort by this president, and I'll call he is the president, putting somebody like Pruitt, for instance, in charge of the EPA, who is against the Environmental Protection Agency.
He's
I
against
think
the
people
environment.
will understand how this has to be against their interest. Here's a guy who's the head of an agency, the Environmental Protection, is supposed to protect the environment, supposed to protect the people in this country, and all he's protecting is the oil interest against the people's interests.
Putting someone like that at the head of the EPA is like making the Secretary of Defense somebody that doesn't want anyone to have a gun.
Well, how about the Secretary of State who doesn't want to be diplomatic?
Right.
I mean, it's the same thing.
but-
So I think this is going to be what's going to happen as a result of this, that there's going to be a complete turnaround in the next 10, 15, 20 years that's going to bring us back to the basic tenets of the democratic culture, and I think it'll be for the best. And I think it has to happen this way.
The
for those
arc of
things to come.
history is in favor of Mother Russia and China, and your country might not happen in 10 or 20 years, is on a decline. and
Well-
Mother Russia and China will be the dominant countries 100 years from now, no
Well-
matter what his class tends to do.
I
Well,
think there'll be a
Trump-
partnership between Russia, China, and the United States in terms of splitting up the wealth in
Yes,
the world,
well-
because they'll be the three most
Yes, well,
profitable countries in the world, and they'll have to do that.
They'll have to-
Globalization,
Hey, I must speak,
globalization will mean
please.
that has to
I want to
happen.
speak, please. You speak of very important reforms, but knowing the class I represent as I do, rest assured they will do everything in their power to resist.
Including war.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do remember the time when Mr. Roosevelt started to implement his New Deal, and much of the corporate interests I am familiar with tried to stage a coup d'etat and tried to have at the head of this coup d'etat a highly respected Marine Corps General, Smedley Butler. But General Butler had the wherewithal to warn the Congress against this coup d'etat. And interestingly enough, nobody from my class who was supporting this coup was prosecuted for it. If there was a more radical faction behind it, I believe they would be seriously executed like the Rosenbergs. I seriously believed that they would be executed. However, they were
The supporters of the coup d'etat.
yes. If they were the ruling economic elite of this country, therefore,
If they were another color.
Since your president kind of has a bromance
Rosenbergs were
with
white,
my
by the way.
great friend.
Yes, but they were
With-
Jewish, and they were able to. They were
I
able
know.
to accept.
With Putin, though.
I mean, that's just the answer.
Yes,
You
but-
think-
Wasn't
You
if
think if they had been Presbyterian or whatever, that they would have ended up in that result?
Definitely not
but
Presbyterian.
if in fact it is found that your president and his family and his advisors colluded with Mother Russians to win the election, that's a coup d'etat, isn't it? That's as treasonous.
absolutely a coup
that's,
d'etat.
That's as treasonous as the
worse than a
Rosenbergs
coup
or
d'etat.
anything you're talking about.
It's worse than a coup d'etat because it's by a foreign interest.
yes, well,
Right.
rest assured, Mr. Trump and his family will never be prosecuted because that's not how it works in this country. Rich people can do the most
he's not
terrible.
rich. He's not rich.
Excuse me. Wealthy people can do the most terrible things, and they can literally, as you can say, get away with murder, and including attempting to overthrow the duly elected government.
Mr. Dose, why don't you, I think I saw a show that you were on with Miss Crawford that dealt with your class and a DeVos conference. Weren't you on a show with that?
Yes, Masters of the Universe.
Wasn't
Yes,
Mr. Dulles on that show with you?
Yes, and rest assured, they are most definitely the masters of the universe.
He was on that show.
But
and in
I
fact-
would like to say one thing about your class and what they do. And I forget, I don't think I wrote this, but a great author probably wrote it, that your class, your billionaire class, talks to your millionaire class about how to screw the working class.
I might have heard something like that, and it does have that effect.
What you say it has that effect, but what we're dealing with, as I see it, from where we sit right now, the fact that Russia is involved in the most basic tenets of this country. We are a republic. We elect representatives. That is what we do. So that if you interfere with that, you have interfered with something that's at the very core of what this country is. And for you to say that, you were probably right that no one will be indicted, that no one will be prosecuted, that this is just going to go by the wayside. Is frightening to me because of what it says about where our country is today.
It
Well,
is true.
let me just say this. The fact that they would be indicted and go to jail, that doesn't solve the problem.
No.
So if we can solve, who cares if they go to jail? If
Okay.
the problem is recognized, that it was a problem and that it did happen, and we can have change as a result of it so that it can't happen again. That's the most important
And that's
thing.
what no one's
Whether they
talking
go to
about.
jail, I don't care if they go to jail or they don't
I
go to
care
jail.
if they go to
Changes
jail.
will
I
Nixon
never
didn't
take
go to
I
place
jail.
was,
in
I
this
was
state.
sent to jail for plotting against the czar. I hope they do go to jail. They deserve to go to jail.
Well,
I'm
I
not
understand
saying they
against the
don't.
government.
I'm not
And they're
suggesting
not
that they
going
don't.
to, trust
But the
me.
point is,
Mr.
that's
Madden,
not the important thing
that's
that'll
not-
come out of this.
It's the constitutional issue.
Exactly.
That we have to be able to preserve this country.
Exactly.
So I understand Mr. Madnick's position. Whether they go to jail or not is not the concern. It is the fact that this country ceases to exist as what it is that we're
Right.
supposed to be if nothing is done.
Right.
We have, and at this point, 45, President 45 seems to have no interest in trying to sort out what the problem is and how the Russians were
And
able
try to fix it.
impact
None at all.
the election and to fix it. He
You
has
know
no-
why?
'cause-
You know why? Because he's hoping they're going to do it again this election. That's why. That's why. That's why he doesn't want to fix it.
Okay.
That could be the only reason. Why else would they want to fix it? Everybody knows they did it. It's perfectly clear. Whether or not they colluded or there was conspiracy is one thing, but they know that they did it, and they did it in his favor. So of course he wants them to do it again, and that's why he doesn't do anything.
That is
Or
correct.
It
Mr.
sounds
Madnick.
absurd, but I'm sure that's
or
the
even
reason.
acknowledge that it happened.
Yes, of course. You're absolutely right, Mr. Mednick. My class has benefited terribly from the corruption of the political system, and please don't be too. Please, Mr. Dostoevsky.
You're wrong. You corrupted the political system.
It's been corrupted for
No,
Mr. Dostoevsky, please give me the courtesy of speaking. Thank you.
You created
The political corruption has always been there, and Mr. Putin and his regime has seized on it and made the situation worse. And please be realistic. Do you think they're going to do? My class is going to do allow anything that would undo what keeps them in power? Certainly not.
Well, no, power concedes nothing.
Yes, and certainly, and you don't really think. Yes, I can see that. I'm starting to see that. I'm starting to fear that this whole situation can only be resolved by not just electing this or that person, but a revolution that would make, as you say, the Russian Revolution look like kid stuff, as you say.
Well, may I say this to you?
Well, you know I
Secretary?
wasn't in favor of the Russian Revolution. You know I was not a communist. You know
Yes, you support the Tsarist regime.
Yes, there are many things I like about the Tsar. I was against the feudalism. I wanted some rights for the serfs. But the fact is, your government is in many ways like Tsarist Russia. The Romanovs. What's the difference between the Trumps and the Romanovs? The family controlled the Romanovs. We controlled the government of Russia. And what happened to the Romanovs?
Yes,
They all got shot. So I don't think Trump and his family will get shot, but I think they all should be in jail.
Well, listen, a revolution can take many forms. A revolution
'cause
doesn't
we'll
have
never have a
to be an armed
revolution.
revolution.
Exactly.
But it certainly will be a revolution if everything gets turned around and back to
Just
pure
like
democratic principles.
Just like
and this
the
country's run
czars
on that basis.
accumulated the wealth of the nation and funneled it into their relatives, which we all know happened in Russia. That's exactly what your president's doing now.
Well, when that becomes clear and plain to everybody in this country,
I'm
then
afraid
I
it
think that
won't
there
be.
will be change, and that's what the point is.
And I'll tell you what else I do have hope for. I have hope that we are now experiencing, because of some policies of this country, we have now, there's a sleeping giant that is now awake. And when the young people say stay woke, these young people are, and they are getting engaged and involved in the political structure.
And so are the women.
And the women, and I think that's your revolution. I think the revolution
That's right.
doesn't have to do with guns and whatever.
Right.
It has to do with the fact that there is going to be a swelling of a class of voters
Right.
that cannot be control.
Right.
And I think that's the revolution.
Those
that
young
we're
people
going-
never really voted, and now they will.
Now they will.
They have an
Now they
issue
will.
to guide them, and women will. This Me Too movement has been amazing, and women, and you can see now in the primary, in the Democratic primaries, dominated by women all across the country, and there's
Yeah.
going to be major changes in the democratic process as a result of it.
And
Yes,
that's the
I-
revolution that you are
That's the
saying.
revolution,
That's
that's
how it happens.
That's
the
That's what I,
revolution.
and that's what, because I'm looking at where we are, and this has been a wonderful discussion, but I'm looking at where we are and I recognize that what we've done is we've touched upon a lot of things, but this allows, because the format Conversations Across Time exists because it is our way of speaking to an audience and asking people to think about these things. What is our motto? We're not telling you what to think. We just are trying to make sure that you are thinking. That's our position. So with that, I'd like to Irv, you were fabulous.
Oh, thank you.
And one of the things that Babette did say to me is she hopes you don't do such a great job that she's replaced.
Oh, no, I'll never do that.
But I thank you so much for being here.
And my pleasure.
And sitting in for, and Babette thanks you for sitting in for her.
I hope she's well.
Yes, and Mr. Dostoevsky, I thank you so much for the illumination that you bring to what is going on in the Middle East and how it compares to what was going on in your beloved mother Russia. And I'm surprised, Secretary Dulles, ordinarily you are so, we end the show and you have gotten us all excited and animated and angry, but tonight I think you've given us something to think about, and that is that there is hope, because the revolution that you're speaking of is going to be people getting out to vote. That's what our job is to try to encourage people to participate in politics.
Yes, I'm afraid that there's going to be a severe challenge to the class that I have represented for a long time, and it's the end, as they say, it will be the end of an era.
And
Thank
I
God for that.
Yes, and thank God, that's right. Thank God for that. And with that, I thank you so much for joining us. This has been Conversations Across Time. Tune in next week when we get to involve ourselves and engage in more interesting conversations across time. Good night.
Conversations across time, 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 conversations across time.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time, the show that allows you, the viewer, to experience imaginary conversations between immortals, historical figures from different time periods. And so, the story begins. I am someone that's always been interested in history. So one of the things that in one of my former incarnations, I was a history teacher, and I thought that history was always taught when the kids could get interested in it and when they could have some understanding of the personalities. So I had this idea, and I was here at Philly Cam, and when I started talking about doing this show, the more people I talked to, the more people it seemed would be interested in the concept. So Babette explained to you that I saw her on a corner because Babette is a former state representative, and I knew that as a person with a feminist background and a progressive background, it would be wonderful to have her discuss things that were going on today, and we could apply it to historical instances. So what we do, what Conversations Across Time is, we take actors playing historical characters, and we have Babette and myself, and we ask them questions, and we mix the time periods. So that's why the title Conversations Across Time. So we may have Frederick Douglass having a conversation with Eleanor Roosevelt. This brings an interesting twist, and it gets you to know both of those personalities. So we're very excited about this, and we try to put people together that everyone would be surprised about. So we do Thomas Jefferson and Josephine Baker. I'm thinking we've done Abraham Lincoln, for instance, with Eleanor Roosevelt and Frederick Douglass. We also are doing Woodrow Wilson and a good German,